Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an incredible edition tonight of Dr. Jane's DC. I'm Jane Ruby, your host, and I'm excited about tonight. We have a lot to talk about, but in a few minutes, we are going to have the esteemed Professor Alan Dershowitz on tonight. Really excited to talk to the professor. He's been through a lot. He's written a new book called Guilt by Accusation. We are going to talk about the book, about constitutional law, and a lot of other things as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we'll be bringing him in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere. I'm also going to be talking on the other side of the half hour about censorship again, because as many of you know, yours truly was suspended for 7 days from Twitter, which is a primary means of communication that I use. I have 25,000 followers, organically grown. I'm really proud of that. They're not bots. I didn't buy them. I've supported other people. I've grown that following in a collaboration with thousands of people over the last few years. So I tweeted something truthful about Ilhan Omar. The tweet was actually a little bit on the older side, maybe number of weeks or months, so it was kind of surprising. But you know, she can say anything she wants online. Recently, there was a tweet that she made that she was ashamed of America. Now, some people were trying to say that that was a fake tweet, but there were some prominent people that vetted it and actually took it off of her own timeline. So unless she was hacked, which she hasn't said she was, she made those statements. But she can make those kinds of statements or disparaging things about the state of Israel, about Jews, hypnotizing the world, and all kinds of other anti-Semitic comments unfettered and freely on Twitter and probably other social media outlets. But the rest of us, if we tweet something that is, truthful, observational, we can be suspended. I feel like I'm living in Nazi Germany in 1940. So I actually was suspended for 12 hours back in the fall, and I thought that was painful. But apparently when you're on their radar, the punishment gets longer and longer. So unfortunately, this Twitter prison is 7 days old, and we'll see what happens. I have had some great support from wonderful followers, some great people. I will mention you all when I get back on Twitter. I will formally thank you all. I've also reached out to a ton of people who I haven't heard anything from. So it's interesting to see how MAGA people, Trump agenda, America first, make America great again, whatever you want to call it, who are your friends and who are not. And I really appreciate those of you who've stepped forward, who've put it out on your own timelines that Dr. Jane has been suspended and silenced, because a lot of people don't know that. And they'll think that I've left or I just haven't commented for days at a time, which would never happen if I had, the ability to do it. And I think the most egregious part of this censorship by Twitter and other platforms is the unequal treatment, is that there are still ISIS-related, terror-related organizations that tweet all the time, that comment. They're allowed to call death to America, call for harm to our president in various forms, and they have no issues. They don't get suspended, they don't get banned, they don't get taken down. Somehow they don't violate the Twitter rules. Hate speech, as you know, and you can all name them yourselves too, but my dear friend Laura Loomer, who had over 250,000 followers, was banned permanently. James Woods was banned permanently. Conservative voices are being shut down. I'm worried that this is going to get worse and worse as we get closer to the 2020 election. And I think it's important, and I think that you all have to join in and help do something about it. Remember the old Ellie Weitzel saying, First they came for the Jews, and I didn't help because I wasn't Jewish. And then they came for the Christians, and I didn't help because I wasn't Christian. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to help me. So eventually they're going to do this to a lot more people. They're going to do more of it permanently. And we're all going to lose a lot of our ability to communicate with each other, to pass information to each other and from each other, leading up to the 2020 election. And we know that the Democrats are going to, they're going to be dishonest. They're going to try to steal elections all over the country. They're going to commit election fraud. Dead people are going to be voting. Felons are going to be voting. And so we won't have any way to communicate or provide heads up if we don't have a public forum. And if there's time tonight, I would like to ask Professor Dershowitz, in terms of his expertise in constitutional law, especially around the First Amendment, what we can do about that. And I've heard the argument, and this is where I would ask him to help us understand more. I've heard the argument that, well, these are private companies or these are corporations and you don't have to subscribe to their service. But it's not exactly that simple, because when a corporation or a private entity develops a tool that inadvertently becomes a public utility, it becomes a public space, a town hall, it almost on its own just becomes a utility, whether you want to call it that or not. And along with that, develops this incredible impact or ability to impact on freedom of speech because of the unequal treatment that's applied based on race, religion, culture, political leaning, that kind of thing. It becomes an important issue to sort out in terms of do we leave it in the hands of these private companies? So I'm going to be calling, introducing the professor into the show momentarily. I'm going to ask you to stay with us, and we will bring him on in about 30 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure tonight of introducing my next guest, one of the most celebrated lawyers in America. He's the author of numerous best-selling books and has advised presidents and prime ministers, and he's represented many prominent men and women, half of them pro bono. He is Harvard's Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law Emeritus, and his latest blockbuster book, Guilt by Accusation, chronicles his journey to hell and back. I want to welcome Dr. and Professor Alan Dershowitz to the show. Good evening, Professor.
Well, thank you. The journey to hell was certainly accurate. I'm not quite back from it yet. I mean, I have totally proved my innocence by finding emails from my accuser that acknowledged she never met me, and a manuscript in which he acknowledged she never met me, and a tape recording by her lawyer saying that it was impossible for her to have met me and that she was wrong, simply wrong. But people still believe the accusation, and that's why I wrote the book, Guilt by Accusation. If you're accused, you must be guilty, even if you overwhelmingly disprove the allegations and prove that your accuser is a liar. Now we're in a lawsuit. I'm suing her for defamation, she's suing me for defamation. and the court will finally resolve it in my favor, hopefully.
Yes, and I read the book over the weekend, and I found it incredibly eye-opening, and I think people really must read your book because you provide so much context, so many details, and you do exonerate yourself. It's plain and clear. And I wanted to ask you a question, but I want to preface it by saying that you are probably the greatest defender of civil liberties, due process, and free speech that we've ever had in American history. And yet you became a victim of this guilt by accusation, falsely accused. You have no pattern, and she had a pattern of lying. Yet, as you say, the stench of accusation persists. How has this happened in America, Professor?
It's a terrible thing, and it affects not only me. The reason I wrote the book is it happens to your son, to your father, to your uncle, to your nephew, to your husband. If you just make an accusation, it sticks, and we have no consequences for people who make false accusations. Part of my goal is to make sure that lawyers and clients who make false accusations go to prison if it's proved that the accusation is false. Otherwise, they have every incentive to do it. They collect large amounts of money. Most people settle their cases. I'm not willing to do that, of course, because I did nothing wrong. Right. I have had sex with one woman during the entire relevant period of time, my wife. I've been completely and totally faithful. I have nothing to hide. I did nothing wrong, so I can fight back. Many people can't fight back. Many people who are innocent still have things to hide. I have nothing to hide. That's why I was willing to lay it all out. But there have to be consequences for people who make false accusations. And at the moment, there are none. And lawyers advise their clients. I know this. Lawyers tell their clients, don't worry about perjury. You can commit perjury. Nobody's ever prosecuted for perjury in the context of a civil case. So just lie through your teeth. Maybe you collect some money. Maybe you won't. But you have no negative side effects that will occur if you're proven to be a liar.
Yes, and I wanted you to explain to our audience, because it ties in with that, why your accuser won't make the accusations publicly. You've challenged her over and over again, right? And there's a reason for that, right?
Right. If she ever were to accuse me in public and in front of the media, I'd immediately be able to sue her and win the case. So what she does is, with the help of her lawyers, she makes the accusation in court papers. And that's protected. She has a complete immunity, she thinks, from any defamation suit if she makes the accusation public. So she just makes up story after story. One of the accusers accused Hillary Clinton of having a sex tape. The other one accused Al Gore and his wife, Tippa Gore, of being on Jeffrey Epstein's island. Just totally false accusations. Secret Service records prove that none of it is true. But they just make these accusations, throw them out there, and there are no consequences. And if you dare to challenge a woman who has lied about you, you're accused of being a bad citizen. Oh my God, you accused a woman? And you're trying to have a woman go to jail? Yes, I am trying to have a woman go to jail who sat and contrived a totally false story in order to earn money. That is a serious crime. It's a violation of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. And it's a violation of the criminal law of virtually every country.
And the second part of the title of your book, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too, you talk about that expression, I don't know where it originated, but how something can go from a movement to a business to a racket. And it seems like it's moving into a racket because these lawyers are encouraging their clients to fabricate and confabulate.
Yeah, and they're making millions of dollars in the process because most people settle. They don't want bad publicity. It's in my case where I did nothing wrong, and I disproved it. Had the former head of the FBI do an investigation, prove there was nothing to it. Still, the stench of the accusation remains. So I've now advised clients. I have a client now, I can't describe the case. I have a client now who's falsely accused, and I have recommended that he settle the case and pay money in order to avoid the accusation being made public, because if it's made public, it will destroy his business, it will destroy his life, it will destroy his reputation. And so people know this, and they use extortionate tactics. This woman that accused me went through her lawyer to Leslie Wexner, the owner of Victoria's Secret, and accused him of having sex with her on 7 occasions and making her wear Victoria's Secret type lingerie. And after there was a meeting with the lawyer, the allegation disappeared without it becoming public. Was there hush money paid? We will find that out at the trial. But it's so easy to extort people and get them to pay large sums of money, even if they're innocent, because nobody wants to have their reputation besmirched by being accused of having sex with somebody you never even met.
Yes, and there's another perpetrator here that I want to bring into the discussion that gets away scot-free, and that's the media. This could not have happened to you and so many other people if it weren't for the media. And the mainstream media not only controls the narrative, but it blocks truth tellers in this emerging, new media. What do you say to that? I mean, how do we ever get back to?
It's true. Let me give you an example. There's a journalist. She calls herself a journalist, named Julie Brown, and she's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize from the Miami Herald. And when she did a whole series based on the credibility of my accuser, a woman named Virginia Giuffre, I sent her a 2 or 3 page email. It's in the book. I included the whole email in the book, documenting all the lies this woman has told. All the lies, starting with Tipper Gore and Al Gore and Bill Clinton, claiming they were on Jeffrey Epstein's island. Secret Service records prove they weren't. She claimed she was 14 when she met Jeffrey Epstein. Her own work records prove she was 17. All of these. And, of course, Julie Brown never printed a single negative thing. She allowed the credibility of this woman to go untarnished because she didn't want to in any way cast credibility on her source, because that would cost her the Pulitzer Prize. If she wins the Pulitzer Prize, it will be one of the most disgraceful incentives to bad journalism ever made. And yet she may, because, people want to believe the stories of the accusers, and they don't want to publish. I have another instance where a journalist from the Beast called me and said, "Oh, this is terrible. We found these emails that prove you're totally innocent. Please let us publish a story about it." And I said, "Go ahead." And I gave him an interview and everything. Then he called me back basically and said, "My editor won't let me do it. They won't let me publish anything negative, even if you have the emails in your hand proving that in her own words, she never met you, and somebody wrote to her and said, you ought to mention Dershowitz in your book because he wrote Reversal of Fortune. He's a famous lawyer, and he'll help you sell books." And then she does that. She puts me in her book as someone she did not have sex with. And nonetheless, people still continue to believe her false accusations. Hopefully, this will all be resolved at a criminal trial, a civil trial. I'd love for there to be criminal trials, but the prosecutors don't want to go forward with these criminal trials, even if there's absolute evidence that the accusers made up the whole story.
There's another part of the story, Professor, that really jumped out at me when I read the book. Really amazing that you were, correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, but it sounded like you were essentially duped into letting one particular law firm represent you in this matter, and they did not disclose, or at least even they lied about the fact that they were actually representing at the same time your accuser, this Boy, Schiller, and Flexner, which you name in the book.
Boy, Schiller, and Flexner
Unbelievable.
has the most accusations of unethical conduct of any major law firm I know.
Good to know.
And yet people go to them. I think some people go to them because they have the reputation of having questionable ethics. And Boyes is now suing me because I described him accurately to the media and how he practices law. And I welcome that lawsuit because it gives me an opportunity to expose him for what he is. And yes, they called me and offered to represent me at a time when they were representing my accuser. I never knew that. They didn't tell me that. And I gave them confidential information of how I was going to win the case, my plan. And only then did they say, "Oh, by the way, we can't represent you. We're representing your accuser." So that's the way they practice law.
Professor, how do law firms like that, over and over again, behaving like that, avoid prosecution or disbarment or some kind of sanctioning?
Because they're very connected, and they're very connected to the bar associations, and the bar associations protect their own. They do not protect consumers of justice. They protect lawyers. Right. And I brought a complaint against Boyes and his partner, and the bar associations just ignored it. They don't care.
Yeah. You talked in the book about, all those years of, where you were, the parties, the Rothschilds, and all that. And I wondered, I got a little suspicious. I wondered if do you think there's any possibility over the years that some sort of Bohemian Grove, like diabolical theory, to try to compromise you for future leverage because they saw you as a prominent, up and coming, famous lawyer.
Well, I don't know about any conspiracy. I know that David Remnick of the New Yorker set out, he told people, he set out to silence me. He didn't like my views on Israel. He didn't like my views on Benjamin Netanyahu. He didn't like my views on Trump. And he assigned a hit journalist to try to destroy me. This hit journalist has a son, a stepson. And the stepson writes about how when he came out as gay, the family welcomed him in open arms. But then when he came out as a Republican who supported Trump, they would have nothing to do with him. Wow. And so they perceived me, even though I voted for Hillary Clinton, as a Trump supporter because I defend his constitutional rights, and they decided to try to silence me. The 92nd Street Y, a great place where people speak openly, refused to allow me to speak, even though I wanted to speak about a book I wrote about Israel. They wouldn't allow me to speak because I've been accused. They told people they know I'm innocent, but they don't want trouble. And that's the way McCarthyism worked when I was a college student, and now we're seeing McCarthyism rear its ugly head again in the form of sexual McCarthyism. Sure.
I want to shift a little bit to your constitutional law expertise. We're watching the Democrats, like they're like a runaway train of hypocrisy. One day they invoke the Constitution, the next day they're trampling on it. I know you've talked to other, to major interviewers like Hannity and Levin and verified this abuse of power. But I wanted to ask you, in your expertise, what is the oversight for congressional abuses of power and violations of their oaths? I mean, I don't see it from any angle.
Well, you put your finger right on it. Congress always says the president's not above the law, but then they act as if they're above the law. There's nobody checking and balancing them. They are the judges of their own members. Members of Congress can't be impeached. They can only be thrown out of Congress by a vote of Congress or by a vote of the Senate. And, for example, this impeachment of President Trump for two allegations that aren't in the Constitution is, in my view, an abuse of power. And yet they act, and they continue to act, and they can do it because the Constitution says that they are the judge of their own authority. So they are indeed above the law.
Wow. Is that a flaw, do you think, in the Constitution?
It is. I think the Constitution should provide for some check and balance on Congress. When President Trump tried to check Congress by saying, look, I'm not going to respond to subpoenas unless the courts authorize the subpoena, they impeached him on the ground that it was an obstruction of Congress. Now there are Democrats who are saying they should add to the impeachment elements because the president authorized the targeted killing of a terrorist who had killed many Americans, who was planning to kill other Americans.
Right.
And the American public won't stand for that. The American public in general believes that a president's job is to protect Americans from terrorists. They believed it when President Obama was president and he ordered the killing of Osama bin Laden. And there's no legal difference, except it's a stronger argument to have killed Soleimani because he was planning future terrorist acts.
Absolutely. Professor, one other question that comes up a lot on the show and other venues as well, around the First Amendment, this whole issue of these big tech giants like Twitter and Facebook. We understand that, they are corporations. They're not paid for by the public. They're not government entities. But when they develop, they're so big that they blossom into some sort of a public square, public utility. Is there any way we can preserve our free speech, other than just be told, well, you don't have to use it if you don't like it?
No, I think that some of the largest social networks have become essentially common carriers. And it's a hard balance because you want to protect the First Amendment. And these companies, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google, all have First Amendment rights. But they also have responsibilities. And the question is how to strike the appropriate balance. It's one of the hardest questions.
It is really.
I taught it when I was teaching at Harvard. and I write about it and talk about it. I don't have a perfect answer. There's no perfect answer. But I would always err on the side of more freedom of speech rather than less.
Well, before we say good night to you, you recently in an interview, I forgot who it was with, but you mentioned that something really hopeful. You said that you wished or hoped that the classic liberals and the classic conservatives could get together because they're really suffering the same, losses of civil liberties. How do we do that? How do we unite around civil liberties?
It's so hard. I wish that Bill Buckley was still alive because I was on his show all the time, and he was a conservative, and we disagreed about a great many things. But when it came to free speech and due process, we were always on the same page. He and I worked together when the Dartmouth Review back in the day was publishing, I thought, some terrible, terrible stuff. And I was a liberal, he was a conservative, and we came to the help of the Dartmouth Review, and efforts were made to try to ban it. Even though I disapproved of everything they were writing, I defended their right to express their views, and I've always defended the rights of people I disagree with. I disagree with President Trump on a lot of his policies, particularly regarding immigration and regarding health care and regarding gun control and gay rights and a woman's right to choose. We don't agree about that, but I surely agree with his policies on free speech on college campuses and due process on college campuses, which the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has now abandoned. They're not on the forefront anymore of fighting for due process and free speech on college campuses when it's politically unpopular to do so.
Absolutely. The book is called Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. You can get the book online, Amazon.
It's $2, by the way, on Kindle. It's a real bargain. If you want to read it on Kindle, $2.
That's a great deal, Professor. And you can find him on Twitter and Facebook, speaking of those big tech giants. Professor Dershowitz, it's been an honor to have you tonight and a pleasure speaking with you.
It's my honor and my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for being on Dr. Jane's DC. Good night. Well, there you go, my friends. Dr. Jane brings you one of the most preeminent legal minds and scholars in our country. It was really, really great to talk to him. I wish he had been one of my professors. He's very balanced. What I like about Professor Dershowitz is he and I'm sure, from what he just mentioned, would disagree on certain issues like abortion, gun control, things like that. But what I really like about him is that he doesn't lock himself into a prescribed little bunch of narratives. He is deliberate and thoughtful, and it is about what's legal, lawful, constitutional. And we've learned a lot from him tonight. So we're going to go to a little bit of a break. We have a few messages for you, and we'll be back on the other side. Thanks for being with us tonight, and hang on for a very important message.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Jane Ruby in Washington, D.C., author of A Sea of New Media. I wanted to tell you a little bit about this book because I was inspired to write it by Andrew Breitbart, who actually vindicated the Tea Party after they were falsely accused of calling 3 African-American congressional leaders the N-word, and nobody could come up with a video or an audio. So he told them weeks later, and on the National Mall, to hold up their cell phones, and thousands of people held up their cell phones, and you could see this beautiful in the night, and he said, there you have a sea of new media to capture the lies. Folks, we can't trust our mainstream media. We cannot trust our press.
When you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people.
When President Trump says they're the enemy of the people, he's not being a dictator. He's telling the truth. They won't tell us the truth. But if we all have our cameras out in public, they can't lie if thousands of us are showing a video of something happening or not happening. So I encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. It's called A Sea of New Media. And if you think you can't make a difference, think about the guy who caught Hillary Clinton on tape. The average citizen caught Hillary Clinton being dragged into the van at the 9/11 memorial in 2016. We never would have known she was ill if it wasn't for that single individual citizen. Pick up a copy of A Sea of New Media on Amazon, and if you happen to see me around DC, I'll be happy to sign the book for you and give you a big hug. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and I have a show in DC called Dr. Jane's DC, Tuesday and Thursday nights on the Exceptional Conservative Network. Please join me again. I'm Dr. Jane Ruby. See you next time.